My name's Dan. I'm Dan Hughes. I teach photography at the Rochester Institute of Technology, and I do use these tools on almost all of my images. The only time I don't is maybe if I shoot something on my phone and I don't need to do any processing with it. And I also teach these tools to my young and upcoming photography students at RIT. And they'll use them for all sorts of different things. I had a student who created a final last semester, and she loves Analog Efex Pro and had a really beautiful application of the tool on a series of 10 images that was really quite nice. Anyways, we're here to talk about Color Efex Pro today. And specifically, we're going to talk about how to use recipes, how to adjust and control filters so that you get exactly what you want from them, both the filters that are applied within a recipe as well as maybe adding new filters to an image after clicking on a recipe. We'll talk about the use of control points to selectively choose which areas these controls are going to affect. And then we'll talk about how to create your own recipe. So you can create a look that you like and you want to keep a consistent look across the board, like my student did, but using Analog Efex Pro, you can do that very easily by saving your stack of filters as your own custom recipe. All right, so I'm going to escape out of my full screen view. And we are going to be utilizing landscape images primarily today. I kind of took the liberty and call some of these sort of urban landscapes. We'll get into those. They're not portraits, so I guess I could consider them that, like a landscape. But anyways, before I launch into the Color Efex software, I do want to just mention that it's highly recommended that you use your raw processing software, before you go into the Nik plugins. So I guess what I'm getting at is use whatever tools you like to use, let's say within Photolab 4 or maybe within Adobe Camera Raw or the Develop module in Lightroom or whichever raw processor you happen to be using. Adjust the image to get it as close as you want or can to what you perceive your final output to be. Now, the beauty of Color Efex Pro is that it's fantastic for experimenting. You get to see the potential of all sorts of different images. So if you're not entirely sure of the direction you want to take your image in, that's okay. In which case, I would just recommend that you, make sure your white balance is close to where you want it to be in terms of tone and overall color. Turn on lens corrections, maybe adjust some of the contrast. If you want it more punchy, you can do that within the raw processor. If you want it maybe a little more flat or faded, yeah, you can do that stuff within Color Efex. But I do like to just recommend that you get as much of the image processed within your raw processor first, and then you use the Nik collection to kind of massage the tones and to finalize your image to get exactly what you want. For this image, I think what I'm going to do is actually just warm it up a little bit. And so basically all of those things that I just said, and I'm really just going to control the white balance just a little bit. There we go. It's probably pretty close to where it was. I'm happy with this color. So we're just going to launch right into Color Efex Pro. So we can primarily talk about that today. Let's see. So in Photolab 4, where we're launching from right now, we're going to move into the lower right corner of this interface and click the Nik collection button. This is going to launch our plugin Selector, where we're just going to click on Color Efex Pro 4. And as this opens, as I click on that, I just want to point out that if you use Lightroom, the software is going to work in a similar way to what Photolab is doing. We're going to take our original RAW file and it's going to get duplicated into a TIFF file format by default. And then from there, your Nik collection or Nik software should launch. And if you're launching your image as a TIFF file, you're going to get this nice little prompt that comes up. And this is going to come up every time we launch the software. So I'll just tell you what it is right now. And then after that, I'm going to click the OK button as we move through our different images. But this little dialog here is telling us that if we want to, we can work in a fully non-destructive workflow, meaning when we're done editing with our Color Efex Pro software, we can save the image. It'll bring us back over into Photolab or into Lightroom, or whichever of those. And then we can close down our raw processor, Photolab, and come back a week later and open it back up and then reprocess the image within Color Efex. So it's a non-destructive process in that way. So you can always kind of go back and re-edit the image if you want to. And that's what this is telling you in a nutshell. So I'm going to click the OK button. If you did want to work that way, like if you're interested in dealing with a completely non-destructive process so you can always go back, you're going to want to click this little checkbox on that's in the lower right corner of the interface. We're here within Color Efex Pro. This is that little checkbox. I'm going to leave it off for now because it really doesn't matter because we're not going to actually save anything from my imaging. But long story short, that's what that little checkbox does. It allows us to work in a non-destructive process. Now, depending upon your usage of the plugins, when you launch the software, what's likely going to happen is it's going to open up into the filter library on the left-hand side here. And the filter library is just a collection of all of your filters. All 55 of the filters that are built into Color Efex Pro are housed here, and they're broken into different genres or categories, so you can organize them in different ways. You might note that my buttons are actually a little bit different than the defaults. So mine says all, film, wedding, architecture, and so on. That's just because I've changed them actually for a previous webinar where I walked through that. I'm going to skip over that for now, but just note that all of these categories, they can be changed. You can change them up and customize them for your own kind of work. And mine look different. I guess that's what I'm getting at here. But anyways, we're on the All tab. That's going to list out all 55 of the individual filters in alphabetical order. We're here to talk about filters, but we're here also to talk about recipes. So I'm going to move into the lower left corner of the interface here, and we're going to click on the word recipes, or this little dialog that's right here. And this is going to open up into, in this case, the En Vogue recipes, which is a recent addition to the plugins. I clicked back. I'll show you. I sort of did it. I didn't tell you what I was doing. In the upper left corner, I clicked the back button, and this is going to bring us to all of the recipes. And what you'll notice here is that I've got 75 recipes that are built in, and that's because 39 of them are ones that I've created for my own sort of imaging and processing and editing. So you're going to have a different number here probably, and it might just be that you have, what, 25? No, 35, because as you purchase the software, if you haven't already, it'll come with 10 sample recipes, the 10 En Vogue recipes, and then the 15 25th anniversary recipes. And we'll get into all of them. We won't maybe use all of them today, but we'll talk about all of them. For now, though, I'm going to go ahead and just click on, well, let's go to the sample recipes. You know what? Might as well. So as I click on the sample recipes, what you see on the left side here is a sample of what your image would look like if you were to apply that particular recipe. So let's click on something that's really transformative. Maybe we won't use this recipe, but as I click on one of these heads up displays, one of these little avatar images, I'll click on glowing fade, a little warning is going to pop up, and it says, adding a recipe is going to replace any filters you have applied on the right side. So it's just a little warning saying that anything you've got going on the right side is going to be replaced here. So usually, I'm going to show you a trick later on about how to get around that, but usually I recommend using a recipe at the very beginning of your Color Efex processing, right? And you use it to kind of create the mood overall, and then you massage those tones and edit the filters here and there to get exactly what you want. But this little warning is just telling us that it's going to replace all of that stuff that's on the right side. In this case, we only have bleach bypass applied, so it's not really going to change all that much. Once you understand or know what these different buttons do, all you have to do so this warning doesn't pop up, or for the previous warning that we saw pop up earlier, just click Do Not Show again, and then click Yes. Now, I'm not going to do that because I teach these webinars all of the time, and as soon as I click Do Not Show again, these don't show up, and then I can't teach people about them. So it's going to pop up every time we apply some of these tools. I guess we just don't have to worry about it right now. So I'm going to click yes, and what's going to happen is the glowing fade set of filters will replace the bleach bypass filter that you see on the right side here. So I'll click yes, and now our image has been transformed, and instead of the bleach bypass filter showing up on the right side, now we have Glamour Glow, Film Effects Faded, and image borders. If we loved this and we're done processing, you just click the save button in the lower right corner and you're done. That's all you have to do. But usually, because these presets are, kind of designed for not necessarily bulk editing, but designed to be highly transformative for a general look, it's usually a good idea to go into each of the filters and see what it's doing. So if you click on the little checkbox that's to the left of the film or of the title of the filter, so here's image borders, click on that, turn it off. Go to Film Effects Faded, I can click on that and turn it off. And I go to Glamour Glow and I can click on that and turn it off, right? And one of the reasons I like to do this personally is so that I can see what that filter's doing to transform my image. So Glamour Glow is going to be creating this nice kind of soft glowing effect. The Film Effects Faded is the highly transformative filter here. And then the image borders is a sort of finishing filter. And it gives us this nice rounded edge border. It makes the image look as though it was, printed on a piece of paper, and it didn't have a hard edge crop line from an easel in the darkroom or something like that. So this gives you this sort of soft corner around the edge. All right, so let's say we love the Glamour Glow. Let's jump into Film Effects Faded by clicking on the filter. And then we can start to make some adjustments to this particular filter, and our image will look different. With this particular filter, the sort of most transformative aspect is probably the film type. So if you follow me to the sort of middle right side of the interface here, if I click on this drop-down menu within the Film Effects Faded filter, and I just scroll over the different film types, which these film types don't align with any actual film types. They are generated to kind of look like it's been a faded print or something like that, or a negative that's been faded and then printed after years or something like that. The idea is to create a kind of vintage effect in this case. And whether or not that's your style, that doesn't matter. This is how we're moving around the recipes, and this is how you control the different filters. You basically choose the one you like. Let's say we like film type number 11, and then we can go into our film strength slider, and I can start to dial that down or up, right? And depending upon where we leave the slider, we'll get a different effect. And the key to this, ladies and gentlemen, is the exploration, right? So you like the glowing fade recipe there on the left side. It looks good initially, but then you can go in and you can kind of massage it and fix it the way you want it to be. So it's a really lovely way of working, and it might take a little bit of getting used to, but once you've got a look that you really like, you keep it. You save it as a recipe so that you can use it over and over again. I'm going to reduce the contrast here just a little bit, and then I think I'm actually going to go, so we're actually hitting upon a lot of the key points of this webinar already, and I just realized that because we've clicked on the recipe, we're customizing these filters. And you know what? Let's move into the Glamour Glow filter, and let's see about reducing some of the glowing effect sort of in the center of the image here to get some of the detail back from the tree. So we're done playing around with and processing with the Film Effects Faded. So I'll just click onto Glamour Glow, and then I can go into my sliders, and we can adjust them any way we see fit. But we can also use control points. And control points, in my mind, are really the most important way and control of advancing your skill set within Color Efex, and for that matter, any of the Nik plugins, because all of the stuff that we've done so far has been a global adjustment. It means it's affecting the entire image. And what we want to do is be able to globally adjust the image and then move in and selectively control exactly how much and where our filter is going to be applied. So in the case of Glamour Glow, I want to get a little bit more detail back into my trees. So what we'll do is just take a minus control point from the right-hand side here. Let's click on the minus control point button, and then I'm going to go and just place a point, literally by my cursor turning into a little crosshair, clicking on that background there. And it was relatively subtle what it was doing, or what it did. But basically, this control point is making a selection of the thing that I put the point on. I'll tell you in a minute how that's working. And it's removing the effect, right? So with the Color Efex software, you have plus control points, which is going to put the filter effect in the area you place the point. And you have minus control points. This is a minus control point, and it's how you remove the filter that you're currently working with from that area. And that's another important point here. We're in the Glamour Glow filter, and I've placed the minus control point, so it's only removing Glamour Glow. It's not affecting the other filters. Each of those other filters that we have in our filter stack on the right side are controlled independently with different control points. And that's just an important facet to kind of get used to. Now, Glamour Glow. I'm going to take another minus control point. Look what happens if we place it on the train tracks back here. That's just going to remove it a little bit. Let me delete these points for just a second. I want to make it so it's a little bit more obvious as to what's happening. So I'm going to increase the glow quite a bit. And then I'm going to take my minus control. We're not going to leave the glow up at that strong of an effect right now. But watch, as I click and drop a minus control point here, it's going to remove all of the effect from these trees back here. And the way the control point makes its selection is it looks at exactly what we've placed the point on. And then in this case, since it's a minus control point, it removes the effect from the object or area that we placed that point on that's inside of this circle. Now, it's not making a circular selection. It's making a selection inside of the circle of that object. If I click on this slider here, so the slider that's sort of parallel with this control point itself, if I click on that slider, I can expand it out, and it's going to make a more broad selection. Or I can make a kind of more specific selection by just zeroing in on the area, in this case, sort of in the mid, well, it's the background, but right in the middle of the image, right? And so every time I place a minus control point, it's going to make its own selection, and it's going to remove the filter effect completely, at least by default. Because not only can you control the size of the area that's being controlled by this control point, but you can control the opacity. And the opacity is the strength of this control point. When you use a minus control point, by default, the opacity is set to 0, which means there's no effect, right? It's removing the Glamour Glow effect. If I slide my opacity up, I can decide whether I want 10% or 28% or 58 or whatever, all the way up to 100%. So 0, which is no application of this filter, to 100% application. And so this is a really wonderful way of applying these filters exactly where you want them to be, and without having to worry about making complicated or complex selections. Now we're going to continue to talk about control points, but for now, that's a minus control point. We're gonna take a look at a couple other images, and we're going to apply some other filters to some other images because we've already spent a couple minutes on this image, and I kind of want to move on. So let's just take a quick look at the before and after. If I click the compare button in the upper sort of middle or upper left quadrant of the interface here, if I press and hold that, I'll see the original image. And then if we let go of the compare button, you'll see the enhanced image, right? And if I click into these other previews, there's a split preview here. It cuts the image right down the middle. And on the left, you see the original, and on the right, you see the enhanced. You can drag that back and forth. And then the last preview that you have is called the side-by-side preview. If I click on that, now I have a side-by-side preview of my image. And then here's a nice little shortcut trick, and this rings true with a lot of applications. If you just hit the tab key on your keyboard, it will hide the left and right portion of the interface, and you'll get a little bit more real estate to be able to look at your image. So you can see that we clicked on our recipe, we changed our film type, and then we adjusted the image a little bit using some control points to give us this final effect. Now, Does everyone love it? Probably not. It's sort of just one of the highly transformative ones that I've clicked on. I do like the aesthetic of it. I don't know if it necessarily fits with this composition, but long story short, that's how you use a recipe. Let's keep moving. I'm going to click the save button now. This is going to save our image back out into our original raw processing software. So as I click save, Color Efex Pro is going to process that image. It spits us back out over into our host software, which is Photolab 4 in this case. And in my film strip down here at the bottom, I'll have my original image, and then I'll have my enhanced image right next to it. So you can see that that's applied. All right, cool. Let's go more advanced with this next one. Let's actually move into this image. We had a lot of green happening today, apparently. And I think my white balance here is a little bit blue, so I'm just going to warm it just a touch. And I'm purely doing that by eye. There's no scientific process there at all. It would have been smarter to capture that with a custom white balance. But anyways, long story short, we've got our image. I'm going to click into the Nik collection. We're going to click on Color Efex Pro 4. The software will launch. And we're going to start with a recipe. Then we're going to augment it. And I want to talk more about control points on this image. I also want to show you how to save your own custom recipe on this image. So there's our warning again. You know, they're going to pop up every time. It's a TIFF file. It's just letting us know that we can work in a non-destructive process. So I'll click the OK button. And I like what's happening with this bleached portrait. Let's click on this. So as I click on it, I'll just hit enter this time. So I don't have to move my mouse and click the OK button every time. Because one of the cool facets of the software is if you've clicked on a recipe or if you've clicked on a filter, you can use the arrow key up and down and it will toggle through your different recipes. So it's a nice way to kind of get a good representation, a larger preview of what's going to happen to your image. I love what's happening with this. I think it's a little bit too punchy right now, but the vignette's really quite nice. This glamour glow creates a soft feel, and the bleach bypass sort of softens the color but creating a harsh kind of contrast. We will continue to play, but this is what I love about opening images up into Color Efex is you can see exactly what's going to happen. So here's purple film, and it gives you a completely different representation. You know, now this photograph is a two-dimensional. It's a I don't know what kind of plant this is actually, but it's a big bush, and it's basically just a two-dimensional plane. So what I'm finding is that these vignettes are actually helping to create a little bit more of a sense of depth in the image. So even if I don't use one of the recipes that I'm initially clicking on, I can get an idea and say, oh, you know what? The vignette works really nicely on this image. So whatever I do end up doing, maybe I'll add a vignette. So that said, I'm going to go back into the upper left corner. I'm going to click the back button. Those are the sample recipes that we kind of just ran through. I'm going to click on the En Vogue recipes, and let's see if we can find something in here. Again, we just have to look and see. I love what happens to some of the tones with the lavender. Let's see what happens if I click on this one. I say we just get really custom with this. So the lavender filter or recipe is applying Film Effects Nostalgic and Detail Extractor. And the thing that I love about what's happening here, I'm going to hide my recipes for now. So in the upper left corner, I'll click on this little button, and that's going to hide the left portion of the interface. It's like hitting the tab key on your keyboard, but instead it just hides that left area. And again, that's that button in the far upper left corner. It looks like a little box with an arrow on it. Okay, so I like what's happening in this image, but really only to some of these flowers, some of the sort of the more dead or the past flowers here. So what we're going to do is just apply the lavender recipe on the flowers and not in any of the green. And to do that, it'll take a little bit of work, but we'll start with some plus control points. So I'm going to click on the plus control point button within Film Effects Nostalgic. And I'm just going to click and place my point directly on these flowers here. And right now, this control point's only going to be able, or is only going to control that set of flowers because A, the area of influence is very small, and B, because the control point's only looking for that particular object by figuring out where the edge of the thing is, as well as looking at the tone, color, and texture of the object that we've placed the point on. Now, follow me over to the right side of the interface, because I want to show you a little bit more with control points. Because this is where these things, it's where we separate the novice from the experienced, if you will. So moving over into the right-hand side, I'm going to click on the word control points. And then this is going to open our control points list, which does two things. It displays the opacity of the filter, right? So I'm going to turn off control point number 1. The opacity of this Film Effects Nostalgic filter is at 71%, because that's what it was set to in the recipe. Usually when you click on a new filter, the opacity is going to be set to 100%. It's going to apply that filter completely. If I place a plus control point on the object or on a subject, oftentimes what's going to happen is the filter is going to jet down to 0% opacity, because the software thinks that we only want to put the effect in wherever we've placed this control point. In our case here, and this is getting a little bit complicated or complex, I'm going to put the opacity of the overall filter at about 20%. So now everywhere on the image has a 20% of application of this filter. If we toggle our control point, we only have one right now, but if we toggle that on and off, you'll actually see in those flowers down there, toggle that on and off, the shift. You can see that the additional color is being applied with this Film Effects Nostalgic filter. Now, that left side checkbox shows you a before and after of where the control point is affecting. If you move over to the right side of the control point and you click on this little empty checkbox, this is going to show you the selection that that control point is actually making. Now, anything that's white has the effect completely. Anything that shows up black, I'm going to hit the space bar on our keyboard. It's going to zoom back out. Anything that's black in the image has none of the effect, and anything that's gray in the image has some of the effect. So if I go in and I start dropping plus control points in these different areas, what's going to happen is we're going to get more and more of this sort of heads up of where the application is being applied. Now, what we're going to have to do is kind of clean this up a little bit. I definitely want to remove some of the filter effect from here and there, but what you're seeing me do right now is actually hone in my selections. I'm placing new control points on different parts of the flowers here, right? So now we have 8 total control points, and they're all plus control points, and they're all basically just adding the effect into the area where I want it to be. Right, so now I'm just going to click this on one more time on the right side so we can see the selection. So if I click on this little box on the far right side, I can click on that, and now I'm going to see where the filter is being applied. And because I've placed plus control points kind of all around the image, it thinks it knows what we want. It looks pretty good, but I am going to take a minus control point here, and I'm just going to place it on one of these sort of leaves, the average color leaf. And you can see as I place my control point and as I drag it around, you can see instantly where the selection is being made, and in this case, where the control point is removing the effect from the image. I'm going to place it on our leaves here, and I'm just going to expand this out around the entire image. And now what we're getting is a little bit more of a honed selection. So the lavender filter is primarily, the Film Effects Nostalgic filter is primarily being applied where we've placed the plus control points, right, on all of these little flowers. We are looking at the selections right now. So anything that is white has the filter applied to it. Anything that's black doesn't. And then these areas of gray, like in here, that's probably because my opacity slider is at 20. If I bring this down to 0, you'll actually notice we'll get a higher contrast mask. I don't want that in this case because I actually want some of the Film Effects Nostalgic filter applied. Long story short, we're looking at the selections in here. I'm going to show you that again on the next image. So if I lost you anywhere, it's okay. I'm going to pick it back up in a bit. Now, before we move on to the next image, let's see what happens if we duplicate all of these control points and we apply those points to the detail extractor filter, right? Because right now we've controlled the Film Effects Nostalgic filter, put it exactly where we wanted it to be, but the detail extractor filter is being applied everywhere in the image. And in this case, I just want it to be applied to those same flowers that we put the lavender or the Film Effects Nostalgic filter on. So we're going to go into the Film Effects Nostalgic filter. We're going to copy all of these control points and we're going to paste them into the other filter. There's actually a couple ways to do this, but in this case, I know I want to copy all of my control points. So on my Mac, I'm going to tap Command A. If I were on a PC, that would be Control A. And what that does is it highlights, it enables, it activates all of these control points. So once they're all active, I can move into my Film Effects Nostalgic settings. So into the upper left corner, there's like a little hamburger, these little three little lines here with a little corner, or sorry, triangle. If I click on that, I can copy these control points. And then if I move into my detail extractor filter, so I've got to open my detail extractor filter, and I go into that settings menu, I can post or paste my control points. When I click the Paste Control Points button, now all of the control points that were within Film Effects Nostalgic are in my detail extractor. So now I have the detail extractor filter applied to just those flowers. Now, I like what's happening here, but I think we could use a little contrast, and I think that we could use a vignette, because I liked what was happening when we were clicking through those other recipes. So what we're going to do, now that we've sort of finished adjusting these two filters, we're going to click the Add Filter button here on the right side. And that's going to kind of button up those two filters for us, and it will automatically launch or open the filter list for us. We're going to click on the Pro Contrast filter, and we're going to add this to our image. So I click on Pro Contrast, and then Pro Contrast is 3 relatively simple sliders, a very powerful filter, and it allows us to correct any color cast that might be in the image. And what this does is if the image, so the Pro Contrast filter looks at the photograph, and if it thinks that the image is primarily warm, if you slide your correct color cast slider to the right, it'll cool the image down. It'll make it more blue and more cyan and more green. If the image is predominantly cool, it does the opposite, right? So it kind of cleans up any color cast issues. Of course, it's a range. You can go from 0% to 100%, and it does not hurt the image at all to slide the slider all the way to the left and all the way to the right just to see what it's going to do. It's a good idea just to see how far you might want to take it. It's how I kind of figure out, where the slider will end up in the long run. All right, so underneath the correct color cast, we have correct contrast. And this is what I'm after here. If I bring this all the way up, it's going to add too much contrast to the image. I don't want that at all. But if I bring this down and maybe add just 10% or 11, it just gives us this nice little punch of additional contrast in this really beautiful way, without me having to really even think much about it. It just kind of does it for us. The dynamic contrast slider is another interesting adjustment tool. And what it does is it actually looks at the histogram and at the image, and it tries to lighten up shadow areas, darken down bright highlight areas, while still attempting to maintain a really nice contrast range. In this case, I'm going to leave this dynamic contrast relatively low. And we're going to add one more filter. So I'm going to click the Add Filter button, and we're going to add Vignette Lens, because I really love what was happening with that image, or with that recipe that we clicked on earlier. So Vignette Lens, the amount, and I don't need to cover every single slider, I'm sure, because you can go in and play a little bit, but this is a nice control for being able to affect and place a vignette on the image. if you want to sort of a post-crop vignette, if you will. So you can replace the center. In a lot of cases, you know, the subject matter of the image isn't directly in the center of the image, and so you might want to replace the center. So you'd click the Place Center button on the right side of the interface there, and just click and place the center of your vignette wherever you might want it to be. You can always replace it, so you can click and place this as many times as you really want to. But let's say I actually do want it right in the middle. I'm just going to tap Command Z a couple times until the vignette recenters itself, because Command Z is going to undo whatever I just did. It's another one of those shortcuts that is very handy to recognize is in here. And it is, you know, it rings true in a lot of tools. The Command Z is not universal, but definitely a common undo feature or shortcut. All right, so let's leave the amount at -100. We're not going to leave it there, but then it gives us a good opportunity to see the difference between these different things. So circular to rectangular shape, I'm going to make this sort of in the middle of the two. The size is how far into the middle the vignette encroaches, and then the brightness is actually the overall brightness of the image, right? So this allows you to create a dark or a light vignette. I'm going to go relatively subtle. And then if you wanted to, you could actually go in and brighten the image or darken the image overall. It's kind of nice at -10. From there, let's just take a look at our before and after. So I'm going to go into a split preview or side-by-side preview. And in this case, I was trying not to be as transformative as the previous image. So the last image that we worked on, we're kind of creating this interesting film effect. In this case, we're just kind of massaging the image a bit to kind of get more out of it the way that we might want to. And we're just playing in this case. In my final print of this image, I've actually removed all of the dead. I opened this from a raw file today for our webinar, but in my finalized image, I actually removed all these dead branches here and then kind of cleaned it up in a slightly different way. It ended up being really quite nice. Anyways, long story short, now we've applied a recipe, we've played with a whole bunch of control points, copied them from one filter to the next, and then added 2 more global controls, Pro Contrast in the lens vignette. If we love this set of filters that we've just used, we can click the Save Recipe button on the right side here, and this is going to save our recipe. So it'll save Film Effects Nostalgic, Detail Extractor, Pro Contrast in the Vignette Lens, sans control points. When I just click the Save Recipe button, it does not come with the control points. And the reason why that's the default is because from image to image, you will want to place your control points in different places, right? So technically, there is a way to save control points into a recipe. I'll actually show you that on the next image. But for now, I just want to be explicit and clear. We are not saving the control points. So we'll call this Highland Glamour. I don't know why. The image is from Highland Park in Rochester, New York. And I'm just using the word glamour as a little explainer or adjective, I guess. And we're going to click the OK button. And what's going to happen when I click the OK button is that our recipe is going to get saved into our custom recipe section. So here's the Highland Glamour recipe that we just created. Now, I'm going to click the Save button because we're going to keep moving. Got just a couple minutes left. I've got one more image, and I need to show you 2 or 3 more things before we finish for the day. Now, so far, we've launched the software from Photolab 4. I'm going to minimize Photolab 4 for now, and I just want to, I processed this image a little bit in Photoshop because I removed some people that were down here in the foreground, and so we're just going to launch from Photoshop in this case, and it allows me to show you how to do that. Sorry, excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of my water. There are 2 ways to launch the Nik collection from Photoshop. You can go to the Filter drop-down menu, that's at the very top of the interface, and you can go down to Nik Collection, and your suite will be loaded into this section here, if it's properly installed on your computer. The other way to launch the Nik Collection is to use what's called the Nik Selective tool. And right now, my Nik Selective tool is hidden. I'm not sure why, because I use it all the time, but if your Nik Selective tool, your menu is not coming up, I'll do this twice, by the way. You go to the File drop-down menu, you go to Automate, and then you go to the Nik Selective tool. And when you click on it, it pops up. And this is how you can access the Nik collection. Now, there's actually a few different views. So you can sort of minimize. Technically, that's not minimizing. You can make it even smaller. You can actually hit the minimize button. It sort of hides the prompt. But you can have it listed out so that you can read the different Nik plugins names, or you can just use the icons. So once you get familiar with what these different tools are, if you're not already, you can just have your Nik Selective tool up like this, and when you want to go to Color Efex Pro, you click on the Color Efex Pro icon, which is the one that's got the red, green, and blue. For now, I'll leave it open just because I assume that I've got a lot of folks in here who are probably brand new to the software. Anyways, we're here in Photoshop. We're going to launch the software from the Nik Selective tool. I'm going to click on Color Efex Pro 4. The software is going to launch. In Photoshop, it works a little bit different than it did when we were within a Photolab or within Lightroom. The software, Color Efex Pro, is going to look and work exactly the same way technically for us as we're playing with the different tools and adjusting the image and so on. But in Photoshop, you're dealing with layers, whereas in Photolab or Lightroom, you're dealing with a raw file that gets completely duplicated into a separate file. So here, when we finish processing our image, we're going to click the OK button in the lower right corner, and then our Color Efex application is going to be applied on a separate layer from our original background. So it does look a little bit different in that regard, and there are some other interesting things that you can do within the Photoshop version of the software because of the capabilities that are within Photoshop with layers, layer masks, blending modes, smart objects, all of these things. All right, so let's go to the recipes. I'm going to go back from En Vogue, and we're going to go into the 25th anniversary. So from there, I'm going to scroll down. There's actually a particular recipe that I wanted to click on because I kind of played with this image before we launched into our live webinar here, of course. And we're going to use a recipe that Lori created, actually, that's technically designed for wildlife photography, but it works really well in a lot of different situations. So I'm going to click on the sunny day recipe here. Again, it says wildlife, but this is the Taj Mahal, so it's not wildlife in this case. And we're going to yield this particular result. We get Skylight Filter, we get the Pastel filter, we get white neutralizer. Again, as a sort of standard practice in my own workflow, I go from the bottom to the top, and I just check off what each one of these tools is doing, just to see, right? And as I've checked off the third filter there, technically the first filter, Skylight, you can see the original image. As I turn Skylight on, I get a good sense of what's happening. So Skylight it's actually emulating a glass skylight filter. So a filter that you would put in front of your lens when shooting film, mostly, because it doesn't necessarily, or in most cases won't help unless shooting JPEG when shooting digitally. And then there's the whole debacle there because you've got to set your white balance. And anyways, Skylight Filter is warming the image up. It's brightening the day. It's creating that sunny sort of feel in this case. The Pastel Filter, it's a strong shift of color. So it's actually cooling the image back down a little bit, but still giving us this nice sort of bright, airy kind of feel. And then the white neutralizer is attempting to kind of neutralize some of the effects of those color adjustments. And the result is this really kind of beautiful brightening and contrast adjustment that is quite beautiful in all sorts of different images. In this case, I want to remove the Pastel filter from the Taj Mahal, and we're actually going to try to draw your eye, your attention in towards the Taj Mahal a little bit by selectively placing some other filters in there, and then also using another filter called Darken, Lighten, Center, which is going to allow us to kind of add a vignette, but not really. It's a sleight of eye kind of trick. We're going to do it relatively quickly because I just realized it's 4:48 here in New York. So I'm going to remove the pastel filter from our Taj Mahal. And I'm actually going to use 2 control points to do that. And maybe instead of removing it entirely, I will just remove some of it. So I'll use the minus control point, but then I'll reintroduce some with the opacity. Do the same in the shadow area, just a little bit, maybe 30 or 40%. So it's still nice and light and airy. It's still reminiscent of morning when this was shot, but it's probably closer to the way it looked than the way I seemingly underexposed the scene and created kind of a dreary image, of this otherwise beautiful place. So I've removed the effect of pastel just in the Taj Mahal. We're going to click the Add Filter button. It's going to open up our tools. And I think I said we're going to use Detail Extractor. I'm not going to use Detail Extractor. I'm going to use a filter called Tonal Contrast. And by default, the Tonal Contrast filter can be highly transformative if this Tonal Contrast filter sits at the bottom of the stack of the filters, right? Now, this is a little bit different than anything we've talked about so far, but the order in which you apply the filters will change the effect. So if you have Skylight Filter and then Pastel, you'll actually get a different effect than Pastel and then Skylight, right? And so that's a good thing to note, and is one of the beauties here because it allows us to sort of infinitely increase the number of possibilities that we have. Not literally, if you're a mathematician, you say that doesn't actually do that, but it does, increase the different number of potential things you could get out of the software. So watch what happens when we take the Tonal Contrast filter and we actually drag it above Skylight. We get a different effect, right? And what's happening now is Tonal Contrast is being applied in the top of the stack instead of the bottom of the stack. And just to show you what it's doing, here's the before and here's the after. So it's attempting to give us a little bit more texture and to kind of separate or delineate each of these individual objects really nicely. It's too strong right now in my mind. I should have a disclaimer at the beginning. Any of these things are my opinion, by the way, right? But anyways, the Tonal Contrast application in this case is too strong. So what we're going to do is actually start with the contrast type, and I'm going to switch from standard to high pass. High pass is a form of sharpening that is found within different applications, but is common in Photoshop. And the high pass tonal contrast adjustment here is really, really amazing way to control a high pass application. And what we're going to do is actually zero out the saturation so that this filter isn't changing saturation. I'm going to zero out shadows, and I'm going to take my midtones down because the high pass application is quite strong, and I only want the filter, I only want sort of this additional sharpening or contrast to be applied in the areas where I want you to look, right? The human eye is going to be attracted to the brightest, most saturated, highest contrast areas within the image, as well as the human form and the human face. But in this case, your eye is sort of drawn into the Taj Mahal because of these leading lines. Well, we're going to exaggerate that by placing a little bit of this extra contrast right here on the Taj Mahal, but not anywhere else in the image, right? So by increasing the contrast, even ever so slightly, your eye, subconsciously even, will just sort of be pulled a little bit more in towards the Taj Mahal. As I turn it off, there's the before, and then here's the after. I think my effect is still a little bit too strong. We can make it just a touch more subtle. But again, I think if you lean back in your chair and we were to toggle that on and off a couple times, it's subtle, but it's effective. It's going to draw your attention in. And a lot of times we want to be subtle here, right? We want to be able to direct the viewer's attention through the image. We want them to look at the important aspects of the photograph, but we want them to avoid or not look at the other areas of the photograph that maybe aren't as important or could just be very distracting, right? So we minimize distractions and we maximize the impact. And by directing the viewer's attention through the image, we can do this. And this application of tonal contrast, the way we've done it, and then a very subtle application of this filter, darken, lighten, center, is going to help that even more. Darken, lighten, center by default darkens the border, lightens the center. I'll show you the before and after. Give it a second there. That's the before. Here's the after. It's a sort of sleight of eye trick that happens. I've placed the center to be basically on the Taj Mahal. And then I'm just going to make the effect slightly more subtle. So I don't need to brighten it as much, and I don't need to darken it as much to get this nice effect overall. And I think I'm going to hit Tab, and let's look at a side-by-side preview. Now, in my own personal workflow, ladies and gentlemen, I should have controlled my exposure a little bit more within Adobe Camera Raw, right? I didn't do that for the demonstration. All I did for the demonstration is I got rid of some people that were standing in the foreground that were very distracting, right? But if we lean back in the chair and you look right in the middle, your eye is going to be attracted to that right image, primarily because it's brighter and higher contrast. But I think that is actually much more reminiscent to how I remember that day being. So in this case, we're basically creating, trying to bring that memory back and not go overboard in this case. Now, I'm going to click this OK button. It's going to bring us back over to Photoshop. I think we're done with the demo part of the day. And I don't want to dissuade people from highly transforming their images, because oftentimes that's a really great way to go. But sometimes you just want to have the utmost control with subtle little effects so that you can direct the viewer's attention through the image and create as much impact as possible, whether you're printing the image or the photos going up on the web or whatever you're doing. Usually I've found, less is more, unless you want those really dramatic things. Anyways, that's enough out of me. Lori, do we have any questions?
We have a couple questions here.
Okay.
Okay, first one is from Mila, who's asking, do you have a naming convention for your custom recipes? Another part of that question is, do your recipe names vary depending on whether they are applied to a single image or multiple images?
That's a really good question. Mila, thank you for that. So I have two answers. One answer is, if I'm making a kind of global transformative recipe that's just creating a look and for no particular reason, I have almost no naming convention. And I'll show you what I mean by that. If we go into my custom recipes. So look, this one's called Awakening, right? It doesn't mean anything. It's just if we click on it, it for some reason made me feel more awake when I looked at it. But some of my others, I actually do have a little bit more of a stronger naming convention so that I know what it's for and can apply it to the things that are necessary. So this recipe here is called DT Rust Project. So my good friend David Turner, who's an amazing photographer, lent me several of his images to use for presentation purposes. And the series he lent me is a series of still life photographs of rusty objects. So this particular naming convention is DT, because that's what I called David Turner, and then it's to be applied on his Rust project, right? So this is a specific naming convention for a group of images, whereas some of these other would be a detail pop, right? So this one, I'm going to tap tab twice. If I click on detail pop, it's probably consisted of, detail extractor and tonal contrast. Oh, you know what I didn't show you? I didn't show you how to apply more than one recipe on top of each other, right? Because anytime I click on one of these recipes, like expired film, pair with pair with Analog Efex Pro, if I click on this, it replaces the stuff on the right side. But here's a trick. If you have a set of filters applied to your image, or you've clicked on a recipe and you like what's happening, maybe you've adjusted it a little bit, and then you say, okay, well, I also would like some of the detail pop recipe. What you can do is hold the shift key down on your keyboard. As you click on the detail pop, or whatever the other recipes, as you click on that while holding shift, you're going to have the other stack of filters that you're using before, Infrared Film and Film Effects Nostalgic. And then because I held shift, clicked on detail pop, now I also have detail extractor and tonal contrast. So this is a nice little trick for being able to apply multiple recipes on top of each other if you wanted to. Now, just to finish with the naming conventions, I don't have a really solid specific naming convention because I create these things for all sorts of purposes. The Fuji Provia Glow is a mashup between Fuji Provia film with a glowing kind of feel to it. And then the inverted glow is actually a trick that I'll use in a different workflow to create a kind of invert glow that I then re-invert when I'm back over in Photoshop. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm not sure if it does though.
Okay, well, you actually answered a few people's questions about stacking recipes, so that was great. Thank you.
Cool.
Shirley wants to see how you delete control points.
Yes. Okay, Shirley. So let's say we place some control points on this image in some areas where we think we want them to be, like back here in the background. I probably don't want any tonal contrast, but possibly in the building itself here, or the facade here, maybe we do want some plus control points. And then should you decide that you want to get rid of one or some, you just activate that control point and then tap the delete key on your keyboard. So right now this point is active. As I tap delete, it'll just get rid of it. If I wanted to get rid of multiple control points at once, let's say I just decided I want all 3 of these control points gone, you can do this two ways. You can hold the shift key down and click on each of your control points. That's gonna like keep it active for us. So that's another common shortcut in the Mac operating system anyways. And or you could actually just click somewhere on your image that's not on a control point and drag. So if you click and drag, it creates a little bounding box by default. And then as you let go, any of the control points that you've created that bounding box around will be active, and you can just tap the delete key. It's going to ask you that you're getting rid of multiple control points. Are you sure? Just say yes. And then once you know what's happening, again, just click the do not show again. I just don't do that because I need these to pop up for our webinars. Cool. One more, Lori?
Yep, one more. This is from David, who's asking, can I reset to get back to the filters to the original settings? So how do you reset your filter?
Yep. Okay. Well, so there's 2 ways to do that, of course, right? Because it wouldn't make sense to only have one. So you could delete each individual each individual filter. So if you click on the little X that's on the far right side of each one of the filters, you can just get rid of them. Or so I can go all the way back to 0, empty filter list. Or the other way to do it, David, is if you follow me to the lower left corner, and we didn't even hit upon the history browser today because we were talking about other things, but if you click on the history browser here, this actually records everything that we do while we are within Color Efex Pro. So we can just go back to the first thing I clicked on, to the awakening recipe. Or we can go back to the initial state, which was tonal contrast being applied to the image. So you can kind of click into any of these particular points and it will reset back to that point. And then you can just hide your history and keep moving with your filter application.
Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour. Dan, great job. We had lots of good questions for everybody. So thanks everybody for joining us. So again, thank you, Dan, for a great webinar. I'm gonna go ahead and let him close out, and we hope to see you again on another webinar.
Thanks again for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. As Lori said, we hope to see you again at another webinar, and enjoy your software. Bye, everyone.